D here.
So many questions. Pretty awesome. But first, a story.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just skip that to get to the part where he talks about the thing that I talked about, and then I get to talk about the thing that he just talked about because it's about the thing that I'm talking about. And then I'll talk about the other things that he talked about in reference to the other people that he talked to.
Story. Deconverted man. Hey, deconverted, we keep talking. I don't even know what your name is. What do I call you, D?
My friends call me Dan Green. You call me Deconverted Man.
I'm just going to call you D. So D says the Bible is unscientific. Good. It's not supposed to be, so check mark right there. It's not supported by archaeology. You mean all of those things are just tourist traps and are trying to get money from tourists?
Well, yes, obviously the tourist traps are just that. They're tourist traps. There's no way to verify where Jesus walked or if he walked anywhere where they claim to say he walked. But I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about actual artifacts that one could find to support various biblical stories. There's the mass exodus, for example. We should be able to find evidence that that occurred. So far, nothing yet. That doesn't mean it won't ever be discovered, but the thing is, it's not there. So there's not much to go on. And then other stories could be supported by other archaeological findings, and as far as I know, there's very little to support much, if not all, of the Old or New Testament stories. Maybe you have something that I missed. It's possible, but in many of the cases, you can identify that the place exists at best, or that some kings existed at best, but a lot of the other things that we would expect to find, we simply don't.
Other than a handful of cities and... Oh, okay, so there are things, cities and kings. What about that whole Caiaphas thing that they discovered? Does that count at all?
Yes, the tourist traps are just there to get tourists to go to them. There's really no way to verify where Jesus walked, for example, which is one of the things you can do is pay to go walk where Jesus walked and get a tour, or I guess you could walk it for free, but that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to actual archaeological finds that could help support the stories of the New or Old Testament. And in many cases, those simply aren't found. They're not present. Things that could have supported stories aren't found. One large example is the mass exodus. You should have found something in the desert. Now you might say, well, maybe they haven't found it yet, maybe it's destroyed, maybe they haven't dug down far enough. All possible, but the point still stands. There isn't evidence for a lot of these stories, or perhaps any of these stories. So what you got in terms of what evidence is there? And rather than saying, well, what about this, kind of flippantly, why not give me the citation of what that thing is that you're referring to, who did it, where, and who verified that it was an actual archaeological find rather than forgery, because in archaeology there is a problem of forgery because there's money to be made. So give me those resources to look into further, and maybe you could also give me other archaeological things that you know about to say, well, maybe you missed this during your research, and this is a counter to your claim. That would have been a far better argument to make against my statement than what you did here.
Camels were not yet domesticated. Are there camels in the Bible?
Well, the Bible, to be fair to you, only mentions camels 47 times. So it's not like it says it a lot. But Abraham had a camel that he used, and he's kind of a big deal in the Bible, so I would have thought that you would have done some research on this before it's just going like, whatever to it. There's been at least one or a couple different articles talking about that there was a discovery. It wasn't really a new discovery per se, that camels weren't domesticated until a certain time, so they wouldn't have been available to use in the way that the Bible says. So that then therefore does shed some doubt on certain parts of the biblical narrative, that whatever was written when camels were domesticated. So whoever was writing it assumed that they would have used camels, and assumed incorrectly. So if they assumed that, what other things did they have to assume to write the story at all? And that's reason to be more skeptical of the story, not less skeptical of the story, because they're so far apart from when the story actually occurred that they now have to fill in the blanks. So how many other blanks did they fill in? And we don't know. But I see that as a problem. And links to how many camels are mentioned and the other articles and everything will be in description below, so you can check that out.
Camel through the eye of a needle, and was the guy was watering his camels? Has no coherent ethics. You mean like hedonism? It's not like hedonistic from the beginning all the way to the end. It's like a 3,000-year time span. Of course it doesn't have any there's like different people.
I'm a bit surprised at this. I would have expected a far more robust rebuttal than agreement that there's no coherent ethical system. I see that as a huge problem. Now, to be fair, I don't know if you've claimed that our morals come from Judeo-Christian background, or that our morality is expressed in the Bible or anything like that. I don't know that you've made those claims, but I do know that others have made those claims. So what I'm saying here in my response, which is complaints or things about the Bible that atheists might be mistaken about. These are my things that bother me, if you will, is that there isn't, at least as far as I know, a set of ethical system laid out, say by Jesus or by God, that says here's the why of to do X, Y, and Z, or not to do X, Y, and Z. What you do have, certainly, is DCT. That's for sure. I'll grant that all day. But I don't view DCT as a coherent ethical system. Now, we can debate about that, but we're not told the why of doing this or not doing that is good or bad. We're just told not to do things or to do things. And, you can say, well, you're supposed to do them because you love God. Well, that's not really a why it's good or not to do good. It's just do it because you're supposed to. It's the paradox of, are these things good because God says they're good, or are they good on their own? That's part of it. But the deeper problem is there isn't any sort of framework given for any sort of morality in the Bible that I can see, and then the framework would be ethics. So I think that's a huge complaint that you've just kind of glossed over here, but maybe I didn't expand upon my issues with it enough in the text comment.
No one around the time of Jesus wrote anything about him until far late in the game. Far late in the game? Do you know that material written about Abraham Lincoln now is more accurate than the material that was written during his life, because the researchers have more access to primary sources today than they did 150 years ago? That's a historical fact.
Now, whenever you make a claim, you should support that claim. So this claim about Abraham Lincoln should be supported by some citation that what you just said is actually a historical fact, that we're more accurate now than we were then. That should be supported by something somewhere. But I'll grant you that it's potentially true and tell you that it's completely irrelevant, because Abraham Lincoln didn't come back from the dead, walk on water, or do any other miracles. So apples to oranges. The other idea is that the modern day techniques that we have are of any comparison to ancient techniques is also apples to oranges. Later in the date, did they really have better ways of deciding what was valid and what was invalid, historically speaking? Or were they still learning that? Yeah, maybe they were a little bit better, but how much better? But the problem of the silence that screams of there's nothing during, before, or immediately after Jesus' life is that Jesus was essentially bigger than the Beatles. The stories about Jesus are such that people would have noticed and written about it had those events occurred to that magnitude. Yet nobody did. There's an utter silence on it. So to me, that suggests that the stories were not as big as they're made out to be. You might say, well, okay, they were exaggerated over time. Well, but how exaggerated over time? Because you're talking about huge groups of people, huge gatherings that follow Jesus, big numbers that somebody somewhere would have noticed and said something about, even if it was to complain about it. Then you have two things that happen during the resurrection, or during the crucifixion rather, that would have been recorded by other people whether or not they knew anything about Jesus, and that's the darkening of the sun, which would have been an eclipse, and an earthquake. Those things, the ground shaking, unless you want to say that those were localized events somehow, somebody would have recorded that. Nobody did. So those are huge indications that the story is legendary rather than actual. But I don't want to make too big of a deal of the time gap between the life of Jesus and anybody commenting on Jesus at all. And, of course, you might mention Tacitus or Josephus. Josephus being one I would be a little bit more skeptical of because, somebody had a forgery in there at one point. And there may or may not have been some forgery in Tacitus, although that's debatable and debated. At best, you have the admittance that there are Christians around, not that what the Christians say is true. So that really doesn't help. But the reason I don't want to make too big of a deal of the gap of time is because Joseph Smith didn't need too much time to convince his followers that what he was saying was true. So the fact that there's a longer period of time doesn't really matter as much as some make it out to be, because stories can become legendary rather quickly and people can believe things with little to no evidence at all, which actually makes us more skeptical of the biblical stories, not less. But the idea that they'd have better ways to record it in the future would be something that you would have to support with evidence. And it might be true, but at best you have them acknowledging that the Christians existed, and that still doesn't say anything about what Jesus did or didn't do. Just about what people believed that he did or didn't do, which by that time certainly could have become magnified into legendary status.
Religions have their holy books as well. Did you see that video I did about all of that? That makes sense. You should see, in my opinion, I think you should see more holy books than you do. That's not a contradiction. That actually confirms what the Catholic Church teaches about human nature, that we have a spiritual soul. So no matter what the religion is, wherever you go in the whole world, you should find people practicing some sort of spirituality, regardless of religion, regardless of culture. You should find it wherever you go. That just confirms what we say. If we didn't have a spiritual soul, you wouldn't find that.
That goes against falsification methodology. You shouldn't be trying to prove what you teach is true. Well, of course there's lots of religions. We teach that there's spirituality everywhere. Well, there's at least one tribe that I know of that has no God concept, and I don't think that they have any spiritual concept either. But your definition of spiritual might be able to be bent to fit that tribe. The Pirah people, I always mispronounce it, but link to them in the description below. But at any rate, I don't think it would matter how many different tribes of people I could point to. Certainly a group of atheists wouldn't be doing something spiritual, but It just depends on what you mean by spiritual, right? The thing is, the reason that I see a problem here is that this God is claimed to, and I don't know if you make this claim, but other Christians have, that this God wants to have a relationship with us. But only like 33% of the world has that relationship, and out of that percentage, probably a smaller number actually are true Christian, quote unquote, whatever you might think a true Christian is. So a very small amount of the world has succeeded in getting the right God. And that's not about the spiritual realm. That's about a bad system being implemented by a God that only sort of kind of wanted to have a relationship with us. Like, I guess it only wanted a relationship with those in the world that happened to find the right religion somehow. It's not a very decent system. And that's my complaint about this holy book. It's just one of many holy books. And anyone can claim any book is holy, and anyone can claim that their God is the real, true God. And the question is, how do we determine what is correct, what is true, versus things that just seem to line up because we already believe they're to be true? Well, see, there's a beginning of the universe. That's exactly what we've been teaching this whole time. Well, that's not really what the Big Bang says. It's not about a beginning per se, and it's about, if anything, it's the beginning of a cosmos, not a universe, because there's two different names, and, you could get into that debate. But at the end of the day, if you have to always say it's God, because the moment you say it's not God, you won't be a theist anymore, there's a problem there. Now, I'm open to any and all God possibilities, because I don't care what happens to be true. I just want to know what's true. But I also want to be sure that it's true. And with all these claims out there, there's no way to investigate all of them. But so far, none of them have given me the things that I would need to think that they are true.
And you do find it, so check mark there. It says things happen that we cannot duplicate, like parting of the Red Sea. We can duplicate that because we've built dams and things.
That's gotta be a joke, but you didn't laugh or wink or do anything that suggests it's a joke. But I mean, really? Moses didn't hold up his stick and go, "Build a dam!" It's not. Come on. We can't duplicate the miracles that supposedly took place in the Bible times. That's a problem, because we can't be sure that any of it is even possible in the first place.
So that can be duplicated. You mean like rising from the dead? Do all of those out-of-body experiences, does all that count?
If and only if out-of-body experiences could be shown to be actual experiences rather than artifacts of the brain, then they could potentially be used as a positive indicator that there's something more to us than physical matter. But in every single case that an out-of-body experience has been tested in a way that makes sense, they've resulted in nothing. This absolutely nothing. So what they've done has been various, depending on who does it, but put a mark on a piece of paper that's upside down on the ceiling, so that if you were out of your body, you could float up and see what's on the other side of the paper. Some people have put things in a box, and only the box is open, but it's on a high shelf, so that, again, if you were floating out of your body, you could see what's in there and identify at least one of the objects. But in every case that's been tested in this way, people have failed to actually report what was there. So none of those out-of-body experiences is anything more than artifacts of the mind. There isn't anything actually leaving them. They just perceive that from the inside, and there's no external way to test it. So no, they don't count. Also, they're not coming back from the dead because they're not dead yet. So that would be another reason why they don't count. But yeah, if you could bring somebody back from the dead, that would be pretty amazing, and that would give a lot of pause to us pesky skeptics, because we'd have to halt everything and investigate the bleep out of what just happened to try to make sense of it. And that would lead us to more questions and might even lead us to your particular God claim. But we're not even there yet, because we don't have the ability, it seems, to duplicate any of these miracle events, which suggests to me that there is no miracle event at all. Those are just made up stories. Unless and until you can demonstrate that somebody or some buddies can actually do a miracle, I don't have any reason to think that miracles are possible. Of course, there's the other problem with the identification of miracles, but that's a whole separate subject, which I'll have a video linked to in the description, because I want to promote myself. So anyways, moving on.
Or not. I mean, why wouldn't they? It happens all the time. All the time. Why wouldn't that count? No empirical evidence, repeatable tests, or valid and sound arguments for many of its claims, like rising from the dead, because there's that whole, we just talked about that. Nobody's making that claim. Christians don't make that claim. Christians aren't saying, here is the little manual that came with your chemistry set kit, and you can make crystals in this little test. We're not saying, that's not the claim. Dispute the claim that we're making. Nobody ever says the Civil War didn't happen because there's no repeatable experiments that we can do from the Civil War.
Right, because everything that happened in the Civil War is something that we could duplicate today if we wanted to. We have the ability to fire muskets and cannons and all the different weaponry that they use, so we can be sure that the functionality of the things described in our history is at least something that we can duplicate today. But we can't do that with the miracles of the Bible at all. We cannot duplicate any of the miracles that happened in the Bible. Not under controlled conditions, certainly. I suppose somebody that's clever enough could make it look like they've done that, but if we're to test things, which would be the way to make sure that it's not a trick, there's no tested miracle event that I know of. And you're saying, well, that's not your claim. I don't care if it's your claim or not. It's a fact that there is no test. But you missed the part about the empirical evidence or the valid and sound argument. Certainly you have one of those to offer us, right?
So I don't want to mispronounce this one. We'll just call him Rob. It advocates the fallibility of the author.
Wait, no, that's it? No, that can't be it. Oh, that's it. He doesn't. So now, a reminder, these are things that I object to about the Bible. Because his video that I responded to in text was, 5 misconceptions that atheists have about the Bible. I don't know what atheists he talked to get that list produced. Like, was it one atheist? I mean, atheists suggest more than one. But did he document their objections to it and write down, atheist A has said X, Y, and Z? Or is this just kind of hyperbolic that it's not really atheists that said this, but this is what he thinks atheists might object to, or what he kind of remembers some atheist somewhere saying to him, or something like that. I don't know. Or is it just clickbait? I don't know. But whatever. I think that hopefully we will have a discussion, him and me, on my channel, or a formal debate. And hopefully he'll respond to one or both parts of my video about his video. But it does seem to me that there is too often this atheist says this, theist says that, questions theists can't answer, questions atheists can't answer, and I don't view that as productive. I don't know if this gentleman has talked to skeptics or atheists, or has done so recently. He's welcome to talk to me anytime he wants via email or Twitter or YouTube or whatever else suits his desire. But I can only answer for myself. I can't answer for other people. I could direct him to other atheists that will answer whatever questions or whatever things he might want. Like, why not just say, hey, atheist, let me know what are your complaints about the Bible, and then try to address those complaints, which you kind of did here, but not to the level that I would really, really want. Because a lot of the times it was kind of just shrugged off, or like, that's not our claim even. You're not even addressing a claim that we made. Okay, that might be true, but if it's an issue I have, whether it's your claim or not, why not resolve the issue? Say, look, that's not something that the Catholic Church claims, or that's not something that I claim. Okay, fine, great. That's a fair objection. It's a fair thing to say. And then go on to say, and here is my response to your question anyways, even though it's not something I defend. Here's a possible answer, or here's what I think, or here's what I believe, or what have you. That's a far better, I think, response than just, none of us said that there was a way to test any of this anyway, so who cares that there's no test to run? Well, I care. Well, but we never claimed there was a test. It doesn't matter. Why is there no test? Why can't we test to see if a miracle event or supernatural event, however you want to label it, is even a thing in the first place? Why can't we duplicate that event? Now, there's the idea that God doesn't change in the Bible. Now, maybe you don't believe that. Maybe you think God does change. I don't know. But if you do think that God doesn't change, then there is a test that they do perform on Yahweh, and it's Yahweh versus Baal. And they have this whole test, and one of the altars, they try to get it to go up in flame, and the Baal people do all this song and dance, and nothing happens, and then the Yahweh followers call on Yahweh, and bam, the thing lights up immediately. Now, if God doesn't change, we should be able to run that same test today and have the same results. But nobody's ever run that test, and if they did, nothing would happen. I'm absolutely 100% sure that neither altar would erupt in flame, especially if you're doing it under controlled conditions, which, of course, you should be, inside so that lightning can't hit it. But heck, if lightning came through the roof to hit it, that would be amazing, especially if it could be repeated over and over again in every laboratory across the world. It would mean something. It would give us something to consider, something to look at. We just don't have that. But also glossing over the empirical evidence part, that's huge. Why can't we verify with some sort of methodology much, if any, of these claims? We can't visually inspect a God thing or a spiritual thing. And just saying, well, it's not visible doesn't help, or just saying it's the sort of thing that we can't see doesn't help, because it puts it outside of the realm of verifiability, and that's a problem. But at the very least, I would have suspected you would have tried to give a valid and sound argument, but you just glossed over that as well. And that's surprising, especially considering that the Catholics basically led the charge on apologetics. Having said that, all the arguments that I've seen are, contain one or more logical fallacies, but maybe you have something new to offer. I don't know. But you have a long, long way to go to convince this skeptic that your conclusions are true. And unless you have empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument, I suggest we all be skeptical of your conclusions. What? Am I going to do the rest of his video? Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, sure. I said I was going to respond to the other things that you responded to. What do you mean I'm at like 30 minutes now? I got to end it now. I can't do that. I got to do part 2 then.